And your message today is that if you earn £80,000 or more a year, you'll be paying more in tax, but if you don't, you'll be paying no more.
But what we're saying today, anyone earning below £80,000 will be guaranteeing you will not have an increase in income tax or VAT or national insurance contributions. And for those above £80,000, we're asking them to pay a modest bit more. Why? To fund our public services. You had Theresa May on last week, Andrew. If I just make this point, you put that very good question to her about nurses. 11% cut in wages over the last 7 years. Some of them having to go to food banks. Our nurses, that cannot be right. So we're going to ask those higher earners just to pay a bit more.
Are we talking about a new rate of tax, because the 45p rate and then the 50p rate possibly under Labour?
What will happen over this next week is that the Labour Party, the Democratic Party, will be consolidating and confirming our manifesto. We'll launch it the week after next, and then we'll identify the very specifics of this. But I wanted people to...
But you've said very clearly that people over £80,000 a year will be paying more.
A bit more, a modest bit more. Well, let me say this. The reason I'm saying this, because I want middle and lower earners to be assured that under Labour they will not be paying more taxes, because I've seen some of these ludicrous figures that the Tories have been bandying about, and I wanted them to have that assurance.
And you say a little bit more, so that John McDonnell, who used to want people pay over £100,000 to be paying 60%, has changed his mind.
I don't want to preempt any decisions that will be made within the democratic process of the Labour Party. You'll see it will be a modest increase.
A modest increase.
But it will go, I'll tell you where it will go, to our education services, our caring services and our NHS. They're desperately in need. And I hope when Jeremy Hunt comes on, you'll ask him these questions.
Well, I have lots of questions for him. Well, but can I ask you about, again, the policy for people earning £150,000, much richer off? Is that still to return to the 50% tax band for them?
You'll see... I'm sorry to argue in this way or respond this way, but we have a democratic process in the Labour Party. This next week will determine that level, and then the following week the manifesto will be there. And what I'll be doing, just to be certain, I will be identifying for each policy the costing of that policy and the funding source.
How are you going to pay for it?
But the assurance I'm giving all the way through is that middle and lower earners will not have their taxes increased. And there'll be no stealth taxes either.
Can I ask you about the stealth taxes in that case? Because you haven't specifically ruled out a rise in employers' national insurance.
No, there's no plans to do that. I've never even mentioned that in the past.
The reason you didn't mention it was why people were suspicious.
OK, well, let me allay their suspicions. That isn't happening.
Not happening. And VAT, what about zero-rated items? Are you going to extend the rate of VAT over other areas? You said you won't raise the rate of VAT, but the extent of VAT.
We've no plans to do that. The only exception we made for that, if you remember, was we announced a couple of weeks ago this issue about private school fees, where we want to put VAT on that, and then we're going to use that to afford free school meals for all children. And I think that's fair.
One final tax question. We've got the Sunday Times rich list today. Very, very rich people indeed. Are you attracted at all by the idea of a wealth tax on the very richest?
Look, I'm quite shocked all the time about the inequalities within our society that we have. And somehow we've got to address that. And we'll be bringing forward ideas around that, both in terms of inequalities of wealth, but also inequalities of pay.
So wealth tax is possible?
No, we're talking about individual areas which will come forward. And every item of policy that we will be identified will cost, and then at the same time we'll identify the funding source. But we're talking about making sure our public services are properly funded. And it is about, we're not talking about hitting people hard, we're talking about modest increases so that we can actually have a society which we believe everyone shares the benefits of.
How much money do you intend to borrow over the next 10 years?
Right, OK. What we've been saying is we're basically saying in our capital programme, we're having £250 billion worth of investments, that's about £25 billion a year of that 10-year period, to put into the upgrading of our infrastructure. Look, I want to make this...
This is a lot of borrowing and tax rises. Well, some people will say this is going back to the 1970s.
Shall I tell you whose advice we took in terms of borrowing? Philip Hammond. He said last year, actually, we need to borrow for our infrastructure, and now's the time to do it. And also, we took the figures from the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, about how much exactly is needed if we're going to be competitive with our European and American competitors. And you look what Trump is doing, he's putting $1 trillion in.
You are applying to be the second most important person in the country, and you are going to be the first Marxist Chancellor this country has ever had in modern times. How is that going to affect the way we go?
I'm going to be the first socialist in the tradition of the Labour Party. And what that means, it's going to be rooted, let me just finish, it's going to be rooted in Labour Party values. And what are they? Fairness and equality, but making sure that there is a democratic decision taken at every stage. So that means I will be including in the economic development process of our country businesses and trade unions and communities, local government, elected mayors, and we will determine together the future of our country. It will not be done by private lobbyists behind closed doors as it is under this government at the moment.